This is the combination of all of the things that trigger my imposter syndrome. This is the Able Tech conference as WebAIM, and I'm talking about a technical topic which is not that common. Hey, everybody, my name is Rob Carr. I do indeed work for WebAIM. I'll give you contact information now. I'll come back to it. The last 5 minutes, I'm going to go just a little bit off script and talk a little bit about taking advantage of opportunities like this event. But I invite you to connect with me. You can email me if it's a professional sort of thing at r.carr@usu.edu, and I'll talk about why it's an edu here in a minute. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm at Rob Carr, A11Y on LinkedIn, and I encourage you to connect. So WebAIM, if you aren't familiar, we're a nonprofit web and digital accessibility group. We are based at Utah State University. I'm based 20 minutes away. I'm just down in Norman. And I actually go a little ways back with Able Tech. It's been great to reconnect. There are familiar faces that I haven't seen since before the pandemic. So if I've looked at you like, I think that guy's staring at me because he might know me, we might have worked together, but I was at Able Tech for 8.5 years. And I sat on the other end of that table where the stress lives, the organizers of the event for a few years with this event. So I definitely am partial to it. WebAIM, we do website evaluation work, which is what I'm going to talk about today. We do a lot of consultation, technical, not technical. Most of the time, I focus on stuff like Judy was talking about, policy, some of the things that Devin talked about with building community around accessibility. But I do work on our evaluation team. And one of the things that I think is still the case at Able Tech, a lot of plate spinning. So I've got a little illustration here of somebody spinning plates. When I was at Able Tech, if we had a request come in to do any evaluation work, well, strangely enough, that was not in the scope of any of the contracts that we had. The way Able Tech works in a lot of cases, there's a contract with an agency to provide a whole bunch of services, and they provide a whole bunch of services. Never was evaluation in any of that work. And that's because if any of you have done evaluation work, you know that it takes a lot of time. It is incredibly time consuming, and it just didn't fit. And so when we did get a request, we didn't want to just say no. I would take 30 minutes, a half hour. I actually have used WebAIM's evaluation tool, Wave, since the beginning of my accessibility career back in 2010 or so. I'd wave the page, I would hit the tab key and see what happened, and I would write a very brief email with bulleted list items of here's what's broken that I could find in the time that I have. So things have changed a fair amount because at WebAIM, as I indicated, I do work on the evaluation team, and we don't just send like a high-level grading the paper kind of report, right? We dig in and figure out why stuff is broken, and we make really specific guidance about how to fix it. We're not alone in doing that. I'm just saying that it's very, very different. Have any of you all tried to, or do you do accessibility evaluation of your own sites? Show of hands. Of course, the accessibility pros are back there. So a decent number of folks, maybe a quarter of the room. Thank the rest of you for staying. I feel really complimented, and now I feel like I can't let you down. It is really, really detailed work. And it's not just a matter of taking a checklist and applying that checklist to a web property. That's part of it. But you have to make a lot of judgment calls. If you're thinking about whether or not we're conforming to a particular accessibility standard, we've got to figure out if we are, right? And there are a lot of places to go to do that. And at some point, you end up reading specifications. You end up reading literally the definition of what terms are from HTML. You end up looking at the specification to figure out if this conforms or not. So it's a very different relationship that I have now with evaluation work. What's similar is that in both cases, it was just one of the things that I do. And even if you do full-time evaluation, you got to stay on a schedule. But if you're folding a little bit of evaluation into your work, your time is inherently scarce. Before I go on, I want to just kind of disclaim this. I'm not going to talk about how to actually go in and do a technical evaluation. That's what you were waiting for, literally a different talk. And it's because I think there are some things that we need to keep in mind before we do an evaluation, before we get into the nuts and bolts of auditing. I use the term evaluate because audit always sounds kind of intimidating. So when you hear me say evaluate or evaluation, audit, test, whatever that word is for you that works, is best. But I think that we need to spend more time thinking about the why. So I'm going to talk a little bit about existentialism in this context of evaluation, but really in general, I think we need to ask more existential questions when we start doing stuff with accessibility. I'm going to talk then about scoping. If you have one web property, if you have a whole bunch, you can't evaluate everything all at once. And I think that there's sometimes some pressure, and there's some literal pressure from leadership at times, saying you have to evaluate our entire web property. And if you're OSU, if you're at the Health Sciences Center, if you're at UCO, if you're at our smaller regional schools, if you're at Rogers, you have a massive web presence, right? So even thinking, oh, we need to evaluate one web property is probably not a trivial kind of thing. So I hope that you'll be able to take something out of this no matter what. And then at the end, I will talk about evaluation tools. I'm really mostly just going to refer you to the slide deck that's out on the AbleTech site or wherever it lives, and click through to those evaluation tool resources as opposed to me demoing a bunch of stuff. So the existential piece. I think that this is true. This lack of these existential questions exists with evaluation work, with training programs. What I mean by this is organizations don't often enough think about, why are we doing this to begin with? What is the purpose of this exercise? Because in evaluation, if we get specific with that, then it's a very different workload, a level of effort, if we're just trying to identify what's broken in a site. Like I said, at AbleTech, usually that's all I had time to do. Here's the list of stuff that's busted. Here's places to go to learn how to fix it, but I didn't have the time to dig in and be prescriptive and be really as helpful as we can be, as I can be now. What that suggests is that it takes a whole lot less time if that's your goal. If you're just going to type up a list of what's wrong, that's not going to take nearly as much effort as if you're diagnosing those more issues more deeply, and if you're trying to help people fix it. Then, and this is one that I don't literally have a soapbox about, but evaluating third-party stuff. When I was at AbleTech, I advised people that let's try to avoid, maybe not the evaluation piece, but I wish that we could find a way when we're deciding about a product that we're going to buy or use, that we could find ways and leverage ways to get data about the accessibility in those without being the ones to create it, right? And in the public sector in particular, I know from working with a lot of folks here in Oklahoma and a lot of our clients on the WebAIM side, the model is still that we test stuff for these people that we're paying. And in some cases, you have the resources to do that. In a lot of cases, you don't. I worked real briefly for a university in Alabama and had a vendor literally say, we'll make this more accessible, and Robbie, you're going to help us. And I was like, I am an accessibility shop of one. I can't be your consultant without getting something back in return. Again, if you have the resources for it, fantastic. But my experience was that that's pretty rare. So that goes back to maybe we're doing really high level, quick evaluation just to compare across 3 different products. But if we don't really think about the end before we get started, you can add a whole lot of work that you really don't need to do, right? And I'll talk about some other pieces to factor in thinking through this. A big piece of this is, who are you turning a report over to? And that report, that might be too formal of a word for you. It could be that it's really just sending that email, or it's just a real quick meeting where you give people some feedback. But wherever you're sending this information, whoever you're sending it to is really going to shape the information itself, which in turn shapes the work that you do or don't do. So if you're talking to leadership, more than likely, even if it's the CIO, they're going to want a dashboard. They're going to want a high-level view of accessibility in the thing, more than likely. If you're talking to a project team who builds a product entirely in-house, well, they're going to want that full set of details. What's wrong? How do I fix it? Where do I go for more information? If you're thinking about your content authors, it's kind of a subset of that last one, right? If you manage content, you update content on a site, you're not going to be able to fix, in a lot of cases, issues that you have in the header or the footer or the date picker. So providing that audience a full set of information isn't outrageously helpful. It's honestly a little overwhelming for them. And if you're trying to figure out how to keep up with the demand for evaluation, you're doing more work than you really need to do. Then we have to think about as well the accessibility skill set within the people who we're sending this information to. I've handed accessibility evaluation reports over to folks that don't know accessibility, And you can just kind of see, like, first their eyes get massive and then all the color drains out of their face. And then they don't engage it because they don't understand what it means. And so we have to account for, what do those people know? What's their maturity with the technical skills or the skills with the tools, which is another really important part. Anybody use Canva for design stuff? Lots of people use Canva. It's okay if you don't raise your hand. I would guess it's within your organizations, it's probably closer to 75, 90%. In the room, it was around half. Canva still, while it's improving, still has some trouble when you kick a file out to a PDF. And in some cases, we've seen PDFs that you can't fix with Acrobat Pro. You literally cannot get to where you need to fix it. So point with that is, if your technical toolkit, if your authoring tools don't allow to like add alternative text to an image, it doesn't do a lot of good to tell the people using the tool, your images don't have alt, right? Because they're like, okay, good. How do I fix it? And that becomes a very different conversation. At that point, it becomes a conversation about, what are the tools that we're purchasing or that we're endorsing for use, and how do those limit what people can do? And then I'll try not to berate this. Internal or external audience, again, I think is really going to change the structure of what you deliver. And like I said, that works back to changing the structure of the work that you actually end up doing. Then we've got the expectations versus reality, which in accessibility, I feel like expectation and reality are often more misaligned than in a lot of the other parts of our professional jobs. What are people expected to do with this? So you hand somebody an evaluation report and it says there's a bunch of stuff that's broken. And I'll think back to when I was on the other side of the table here at AbleTech. If somebody would hand me a new project, maybe 3 weeks out from the conference, was not the best time, right? There was a lot going on at the last minute, and the mental space was not there to take something else on. So I think we really need to really think about what the expectations are, and can people actually engage this report? A lot of the time, the report will get thrown over. And then one of the big pieces, and this goes back a little bit to the existential side of this, how are those people supported? The folks who are in a position to fix whatever you might have found or whatever a third-party evaluator found, what kind of support do they have? One of the biggest things that they often don't have is time, even if they're not up against a deadline. I think one of the biggest challenges that those of you who are trying to make the web more accessible face is, you don't have time. This becomes a training related issue as well. You don't have time to pursue training. One of the biggest issues is you don't have time to put training into practice, right? That's one of the biggest mistakes I see organizations make, is they're like, hey, train all our web devs, train our content people. And there is a lot of really good training out there that people cannot put into practice because they get back to work and all the deadlines are exactly the same. So we've got to think about some of these bigger organizational issues, because if you don't think about and address some of the root cause stuff, even if it's just in your department, right? Maybe you can't fix it up to the high leadership level. I'm going to come back around to leadership here in a moment, but maybe at the local level you can. And if you're not accounting for things like this, it can, again, add a lot of work if you're trying to evaluate, and it can really make your whole effort very, very brittle, because people might start to have a little bit of disdain about accessibility. Questions up to now? I'm like, dude, I had questions. I could form questions in the last talks, Rob. What are you doing? We'll get there. One of the most important things, if you don't know a web property, is to pull in the people that do. It's instrumental that people who know web properties are heavily involved in all these conversations. And if that's not you, pull in the site owners, the developers, the content folks, whoever it is. You're going to learn just a ton. When I was at AbleTech, we worked with a group, I think it was somebody in Oklahoma City. They had a platform that had, the company that they bought it from had gone out and bought 2 other smaller companies' platforms, and they just branded them all the same, put them all together. And there were 3 different date pickers or accordion menus. Like, there were 3 different versions of these different interactions, depending on what part of that software you were in. So from an evaluation perspective, that triples the work. Instead of evaluating 1, I need to evaluate 3. That's fine. But if I don't know the web property well enough to be able to know that, then I need to find who does, right? because I'm going to miss stuff. It's going to inform a ton about the scope and scale of the effort. They're going to have a really good idea of what the audience capacity is. That's some of the things that I just talked about. And one thing that I think is really important with accessibility is that this can help to lower the tension. And what I mean by that is, if you hand a report to somebody who didn't even know that it was coming, right? Your boss says, hey, check this department's stuff. And you hand that department the report, they don't know what's coming. The tension is not going to be terribly low. And that's an organizational failure at that point, right? That's not coordinating across different groups. Then leadership, outrageously important. Bigger picture thoughts. So at WebAIM, most of what I do is, my role is strategic accessibility coordinator. Most of what I do is focused on bigger picture strategic planning around accessibility, procurement, et cetera. So I can take a relatively small topic and scale it up quite a bit, which is what I'm doing here. We have these systems in place within our organizations, right? Whether we're buying something, we're building it, we have human beings, we have tools, we have influence and decision-making. We have all of these things happen as part of these systems. Most of the time, in my experience, the system itself isn't real well informed about accessibility. Does that make sense? So you have these systems that lead to these products getting out on the web, but those systems aren't very well informed about accessibility. They don't account for accessibility in a really ingrained way. Accessibility comes along at the end a lot of the time, and that still happens. I feel like all of us who do talks about accessibility have been saying that for way too long, but it's still true. And that is usually an organizational failure. It's not often completely up to like a team who just can't find a way to work it in. It's because they have other pressures. So these systems need to make sure that people have the time to fix the things that someone finds, that people have the time to learn how not to re-break it or break something else in a new and unique and fun way, which also happens quite often. We want to try to avoid accessibility whack-a-mole, right? Let's look at the same web property. Let's have people fix it, knock the moles down. Let's keep on going and just rely on evaluation reports as our training mechanism. We need to look at this a lot more holistically. When it comes to leadership too, you need tiebreakers. If you're in one department, you have your departmental website you have to worry about. It may just be that you need your department head to be the one to say, okay, well, we will prioritize fixes in this way. But if you're working across multiple web properties, multiple courses in a teaching environment, you're going to need people that say, prioritize this over that. And at scale, at organizational or university scale, that can get really complex. And that means that necessarily you need leadership higher on up to be able to do that A/B test, right? Like when you go to the eye doctor, if they're checking the vision between two eyes, that comparison of when it comes down to it, which one of these gets in line first? Whether it's a fix, whether it's a web property when you have a whole bunch and you need to evaluate them, you need leadership involved with this. And again, lowering tension. So this gets a little bit bigger picture as well. Leadership, if they are actually leading on accessibility, if they're actually setting the culture, saying, okay, accessibility is what we're going to do. It's just going to be part of the fiber of our work. That lowers the tension tremendously, no matter what the conversation is. At the very least, if you're getting very similar charges from leadership across different parts of the organization to say, we're going to try doing accessibility better, also lowers the tension. So really, really critical. And I would say that the actual like active leadership by leadership in accessibility is one of the biggest gaps. It's one of the biggest challenges that I've seen with organizations. It's often entirely grassroots. And you've got to have high up leadership saying, this is what we're doing, and facilitating actually doing it. Okay, let's try to scale it back a little bit because I just went all organizational behavioral change on everybody. But it will help the work quite a bit to think about some of these big picture things. Now, there's a lot of stuff there you might not be able to affect change over, and that's okay too. You can do what you can do. And I'm not asking you to become a crusader on your campus for accessibility or within your organization. If you want to, great. Know that it can be a little exhausting, but if you can just work even at the more local departmental level with leadership, for example, and get them to where they're facilitating the work, it can at least help. Okay, so now let's get closer to the work. Scoping and sampling, two different conversations here. When it comes to a sample, this is really in a situation where you have multiple web properties. or you have ownership over, Judy mentioned, you have a mobile app and you have your main organizational website. Maybe you have departments within that. You have student-facing software. You have all of these different pieces in a lot of your organizations. So how do we decide where these different pieces fit in? And the first thing that most people think about is the last thing I want to talk about. That is intentional, not because I don't think it's a good metric. I just think there are a lot of things that are equally important. Starting with, what are the things that are most mission critical? Think about the mission of your organization. If you're in education, well, a big part of that mission is teaching, right? And so that is a mission critical piece. If you're an R1, a Research 1 institution of higher education, and research is really important, that seems pretty mission critical. The phrase mission critical, to give credit where it's due, even if it is anonymous, it was a client we worked with who had internal conversations trying to prioritize, I think it was 30 or 35 sites that we were going to work with them to improve. And this was the phrasing they came up with. They internalized what we said, and they said, well, okay, we feel like then we need to look at our mission. And when we're trying to decide between these two different web properties, we make the decision based largely on which one aligns best and most tightly with our mission. If you think that through, that can be a little bit of a sticky conversation, because then you're deciding that somebody over here doesn't align as well with your mission as someone else does. This is another place where if this is the frame of mind you take into it, I think you need leadership setting a tone and messaging on why this is the mindset. What do you have direct access to? If, like I said before, your primary responsibility is on content, you don't do any design, then what can you fix? Well, you can fix content. So that's a big piece of making some of these priority decisions. What can people fit into their schedules? To reiterate that you have to account for what people already have on their plates, or it's going to be really, really brittle. And then one of the later ones is, what is high traffic? The first metric most organizations think about is, let's talk about page views and course enrollment, which, yes, these are really important variables. I just wanted to tuck this in a little bit later in the conversation because it's not the only one. It's usually easy to get, which is why I think it has ended up being one of the drivers for a lot of people making these decisions. It's just one of the variables to factor in. The final piece, I think, last but certainly not least, is what is the most important for an audience? You may have, if you're a bigger public entity especially, you might have programs that aren't even really on the radar from that big picture mission view, but they are targeted at people with disabilities. Things like that, pretty obviously, that needs to be bumped up the list a little bit, right? Because that's your intended audience. Does that make sense? Nod, wake yourself up. Last talk of the day, we're good. Then within properties, within a website, it's not really feasible in most cases, unless it's a 10-page site, to think, I'm going to evaluate every single one of these pages. And we, in our work at WebAIM, we don't go through every single page. Clients can't afford it, frankly. It is prohibitively expensive unless it's a 10 or 15-page site. So we have to think about then, how do we make sure that we're getting a good representative sample? And what we aim for is to try to get an example of every theme or template, layout, whatever phrasing you use. Try to get an example of each one into your sample. And then think about components. I mentioned date pickers, accordions, any of these unique interfaces that you have, tab panels, file viewers, anything like that, you want to try to grab an example of at least one. And remember, sometimes you can have something that looks basically the same, functions basically the same, but it's built differently. So again, lean on whoever knows the web property to make sure you get an example of each one of these. And if you're in a web application, what are the critical user journeys? What are the steps that human beings need to take to get from where they are now to whatever their desired state is? So think about bill pay, right? That's a pretty easy example. We all pay bills. Those are often multi-step processes. That's a good example of something you'd want to fold into a sample. One of the ways that I think we can make this work a little bit easier is to extend this idea of web components, because web components are a thing, right? They're these distinct but multifaceted interaction. Then I think we can also consider things like a site header or a site footer. as a component. I mean, it's not in the traditional sense, but when it comes to trying to approach evaluation in a more granular way, this can be a really helpful approach to keep you from being inundated by the evaluation work and to keep whoever you're sending your results to from also being just swamped with stuff. You know, if you send a 40-page evaluation report to somebody who has time to work on 4 pages of it, then again, that tension is going to be a little higher. So there are ways that I think we can take things, even like a mobile menu. As an aside, mobile menus are really, really broken a lot of the time. So mobile menu, you scale a site down to a smaller viewport, right? Those are often very, very broken from an accessibility perspective. So I called it out here as another example of a smaller, more atomic kind of thing you can evaluate to hopefully start to work toward more of an iteration. Going through this in cycles can be really, really helpful. Most of the time, the work that we do, the client says, evaluate this whole thing or evaluate all of our 35 department sites. If they can manage that, if they can take all of that in, great. If you're working internal, I think it's a really good idea to do this in phases. So to take a look at the individual components, to take a look at the header, the mobile menu, because then you're not swamped with a massive 30-page evaluation, like evaluating 30 pages, and they're not swamped with all of that feedback. You're also not as much of a bottleneck at that point. And none of us likes to be a bottleneck, but I should ask this. How many of you all have accessibility officially written into your job description? You work in QA and the speakers are like, I mean, you all count, but that's not really, yeah, okay, thanks, Christina. So literally in the room, I would say there were less than 5 who have accessibility written into your job description, which suggests to me, number one, we got to keep working. I'll talk about that later to get it so that it is written into those job descriptions so that maybe your time is protected a little more, but that's literally a different talk. But it reinforces to me that this need to maybe approach this if you're asked to start doing evaluation work, start to think about iterating through it so you're not just shut down because you can end up shut down very, very quickly. That's interesting. We have some work to do. Try to get you all some extra recognition for what you're already doing. Okay, questions about those kind of fluffier pieces of evaluation? Yes, Glenda. Is this a pop quiz, Glenda?
No, I was just thinking when you're prioritizing, what is your opinion of, let's say you're at a large university and you're trying to fix all the things. Do you ever look at IT security disaster recovery as a good way to consider prioritization?
Yeah, and I don't know if you've been keeping up with some of the work EDUCAUSE has been doing. EDUCAUSE is higher ed IT people, but they have a tool, and it doesn't really speak to this, but it's encouraging because of the work that they're doing. They have something that's called the HECVAT, H-E-C-V-A-T. It's a procurement instrument, but it is a good example of that alignment. I think any mechanism you can find within your organization where you're already doing some of this, if it's a fit to put accessibility in with it, absolutely makes sense. Yeah, there's no question. Lucy, hang on, the mic is coming.
I mean, the HECVAT is the best example of this, but I mean, I've found that partnering with security and privacy is critical because people will remember one of these things, but not remember the other two. So, you know, I meet monthly with my security and privacy officers and they say, oh, we're about to review X, Y, or Z. And I say, I've never seen that. Or I tell them of a one that I've been reviewing and they say, we've never seen that. And it's kind of a beautiful partnership in general because we all work with each other. And, you know, something that turns out I might have reviewed and security reviewed, and they don't know what my results were, and I don't know what their results were. Turns out that, you know, the one product that both of us reviewed that we don't know what each other's results were, neither of us recommended.
Yeah.
And so it gives us more ammunition, basically. It's critical.
Well, and more voices saying we need to slow down, especially with purchased stuff, with third-party things. More voices saying, let's actually be considerate about this and not like kind, but let's actually consider these different variables before we make a purchase or use something. I've seen a lot of even more formal purchasing processes that aren't very formal. You know, it's like, well, how does everybody feel about this one? And that's it. And there's not anything to really make it so that when you do that evaluation, it's engaged and it's scored and it's objective. And accessibility is weighed heavily enough to stop somebody from pushing a purchase through when one of the other products you're looking at is actually more accessible and still does everything else that the others do. So the other piece with security, just kind of in general, is that accessibility and security really are much more tightly bound than you might think. I think Judy gave the example of you know, a separate but equal thing, right? You have to call somebody, you have to rely on someone else. There are a lot of settings where we're asking people with disabilities to share personal information that they shouldn't be asked to share with somebody in order to get something done, right? So there really is a strong coupling between privacy and security and accessibility that I think what you're describing, Lucy, if that can be formalized, then I think it can help in other ways as well. Anything else? Okay, actual evaluation stuff. For the most part, I'm just going to talk through some things as opposed to trying to demo a whole bunch of tools because I just want to leave you these tools and resources. It's going to be really WebAIM heavy, which yes, I work at WebAIM, but WebAIM, like when I started doing this work in 2010, was the most human readable source for information on accessibility on the web, and we still try to contribute a ton. So it's WebAIM heavy. It's not a pitch. It's just this stuff is free and hopefully very helpful. So the first one that's linked here is our evaluation guide. We actually have two different evaluation guides. The evaluation guide is quite a lot. It's if you're doing really deep dive evaluation work. So if someone's just asking you for a few pointers, the quick reference may be more helpful. I think the quick reference is also a really good starting point. If you don't do currently much technical evaluation and suddenly you're given that hat to wear, the quick reference can be a good starting place as well. It documents things like what are the expected keyboard behaviors that you should have when you're navigating a site via keyboard. These all link out to the different tutorials we have on different screen readers as well. So I think hopefully very, very helpful. We use the evaluation guide internally. It's really kind of documentation of our this at WebAIM. I said that, you know, checklists, I think I kind of diminished checklists earlier in the talk. It's still really helpful. The last thing that I do before I finalize a report is just go through the checklist and make sure I didn't skip a step somewhere. The checklist, our checklist is our interpretation of the different standards. I think someone said earlier, it might have just been a conversation, it's still very true. You can sit three accessibility geeks down at a table together and we will all come up with slightly different interpretations of at least some of the standards. Some of them really straightforward. Some of them, there's a lot of nuance. Like I said before, there are definitions, there's a lot of research. So this is our interpretation. We link back to all of the actual standards from there. The contrast checker that we have, it's the most highly trafficked page on our site by like a huge margin. It's all HTML based. You can go in and either put in the color value for a couple of colors. It'll run the algorithm for you. If you're on Chrome and Edge, there's a neat little eyedropper that you can use even with your keyboard to go and select colors. If you don't know them, it'll run the math. It'll tell you if it passes or fails for color contrast. Another tool that we use really often, we do have a browser plugin for it now, so you don't have to load up the page. There's a plugin as well. One of the most, I think, important tools that you're going to have when you're doing evaluation work is a keyboard. There's a lot that you will discover just tabbing through pages. Like I said, in different views. Hit your responsive points, you know, zoom your browser up quite a bit. To actually test under the standards, I'm not going to get into the nuance of that, but zoom in on the page 200 or 300% and go through everything with the keyboard again. A lot of folks don't expect anyone to interface with a small device using a keyboard, but a lot of people do. And we need to make sure that our stuff works in that state, and the keyboard is the best tool to do that. Wave is our free evaluation tool. There is a website. You can go to wave.webaim.org. That's the shortest link on here that I can actually announce. You can type or copy and paste a web address into that page. It sends everything to a server, runs a bunch of tests, sends a report back. There's also a browser extension. I highly suggest using the browser extension because it's local on your machine. There's no data going anywhere. And if you need to get behind a login, or if you're just messing around locally on your machine, you can still run it and it'll give you a bunch of automated results. Developer tools, if you are on the more technical side, DevTools is amazing. Developer tools provide so much information. There are accessibility views in developer tools. If you're not familiar, you don't need to be yet. I'll just leave it at that. If you don't know what developer tools is, maybe you don't need to. What it does is it exposes the HTML that's on the page, and you can learn a whole bunch. If you're going to be recommending fixes, you really need to work at that level more than likely. And even with evaluation, it's a very helpful tool. Assistive technology, really, really important as well. So using a screen reader, we primarily use a screen reader when we fold assistive technology into what we're doing. It exposes so much of what can be broken or even just clumsy. Most of our folks, they just want, are we conformant to WCAG? And that's the floor, right? When you actually use assistive technologies on a web property, you learn just a metric ton. The other way that you learn a metric ton is if you include human beings with disabilities in this process. This doesn't necessarily add to the efficiency depending on how you make this work, but the feedback you're going to get from a user experience perspective is invaluable. It's really, I think, critical to get a much more full picture of what's accessibility in this web property and what's the experience like, right? There are groups, I've got a lot of people who know who these groups are. I know Fable can connect people with disabled testers. I know Nobility still does that, right? Accessibility folks in the room. Are there other groups that do that? Glenda and those are my two go-to recommendations.
User testing, did you
Yeah.
do user testing?
Yeah.
And yeah. And we do it at DQ.
Okay. You have to, yeah, that's good. And then Rachel? Quality logic as well. Okay. Okay. Thanks. I'll add two more to the list. Again, the accessibility, the strict conformance stuff, you can get, I think if you don't have a disability, if you have the technical knowledge, but to go beyond that strict conformance, because we all know stuff can be conformant and still really suck as far as accessibility goes, as far as actual user experience goes. So folding people in is really key to this as well. So with respect to screen reader testing, screen readers are tools that there is a learning curve to use. How many of you all have tried to use a screen reader unless you use it day to day to do anything with the web, to run over a website? We've got around a dozen, 15, 20. So when you're new to that experience, oh yeah, Lucy, go ahead.
All I wanted to say is that, it is a very hard tool to use. You're right, 100%. And I think when you do bring in the users with disabilities, use them effectively. Don't, just set them loose on the website and tell them to find things. Give them tasks, give them objectives, make sure that their time is effective. And God help us, please don't expect them to do it for free.
Yeah, I failed it. That's actually in my speaker's notes and I didn't say it.
Yeah, I mean, but you've got to be effective with it. Value our work when we have disabilities and consider that, our time is also limited.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for making that point. And the tools, there is a learning curve. What I will say is if you're just trying to evaluate stuff, you don't have to be an expert. 10 or so shortcuts, maybe 20 is the most you'll need if you're really just trying to evaluate for accessibility. One thing that you need to keep in mind is that these technologies can read things differently. Between one to the next, they announce things differently. And then there are times when it can just kind of freak out. A screen reader can start to hallucinate. And I've had to completely restart my machine to get going again because between the browser and the operating system and the screen reader, everyone is so confused that they are no longer communicating effectively at all. And so there are times when you're going to start hearing things that you're like, what the heck? It could be that there's an issue between those three parts. They're not dancing very well together anymore. Chad?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really good point. I mean, it's one thing for that to happen to you and me, but imagine how frustrating that is for somebody with a disability and them not understanding what's happening with that screen reader. You know what I mean? Like I've tested documents multiple times and I'm like, okay, read the next heading. And it's like, nope.
Right.
I'm like, please. It's like, nope. You know what I mean? So like, the only choice is, force quit, restart it, and go from there. Did you talk about the verbosity settings
I
already?
haven't yet. No. That's next.
I don't want to steal your thunder, but my partner and I had this experience where we were reading a document at a conference live, and we were reading a financial table. Now, I don't know if anybody knows anything about financial tables, but they indicate negative values in parentheses. By default, screen readers do not voice parentheses. So it was trying to tell me that they lost $30 million. It voiced it as they gained $30 million. So how horrible of an experience is that if you don't know what you're doing, and those are the things you find, to your point, those are the things you find, when you test it.
The other place, and we talk about this in our trainings with using color to convey information and using red to show that something's poisonous, green show that it's not. And one of the options we give our training participants as far as a way to fix it is, what if we just like bold and italicize one or the other? And it's the same thing with screen readers. Out of the box, they're not going to announce those inline styling changes. So the recommendation then well, try to keep this from happening and try to really discover things like what Chad and I just talked about. Keep the verbosity settings basically stock. If you're just evaluating, right? You can adjust the speech rates. And I think once you get used to hearing a screen reader, you're not going to want to hear it at the rate that it speaks at out of the box, and you will speed that up. Otherwise, I think it makes sense to just keep it all default. And really what the screen reader is going to help you to get insight into is the structure and navigation, form interactions, dynamic content. If you have a site or a form where you check a box and content changes, that can be okay. That can also be really awful depending on where it pops up on screen. So there's a lot of stuff that you will want to focus on with that. Yeah, Chad.
Yeah, and there's one more thing, to your point, like I would not be afraid to add content to the website that provides instructions for users of assistive technology. Like in the case of that financial table, we added a paragraph that said, the following table indicates negative values in parentheses. For best user experience, increase your punctuation or verbosity settings so that you can properly hear it.
Yeah. Lucy, go ahead and then we'll head on.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, as a tester, it's hard as hell to use the default settings, but I don't adjust them because I can't, because I need to know. I do turn off the punctuation because I really don't want to hear, a 5-page essay with every single punctuation's in it. But it's critical to use those default settings. You just don't know. And you've also got to know how the particular screen reader you're using behaves with certain functions. When you're getting to more advanced type things like ARIA labeled by, some screen readers don't read it. Don't think it's your problem. You've got to realize which screen reader you're using and does it support that? And if it does, how does it support that? And so sometimes it's best to not try and do that testing without a native user.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, there are times when the readers just aren't compatible with something that's structured correctly. And then it's a screen reader bug or it's a browser bug, right? And I think a lot of us end up chasing our tails, not chasing our tails, chasing those bugs that we don't have any control over. They're not in our web property. So this slide is the one recommended screen readers for testing. This is where we link out to our tutorials on each one, just to give you an idea of the utilization. So this data comes from the screen reader user survey that we do about every 12 to 18 months. And in the last one, our respondents said that between JAWS and NVDA, these two are by far and away the most commonly used on the Windows side. JAWS reported 40.5%, NVDA 37.7%. Those are going to fluctuate a little bit. They have over the last 10 years or so. We've been collecting data. VoiceOver is built into Macs and is really powerful. The overall percentage is 9.7%. I think of Mac users, it's got to be pushing 100. We don't ask that granular of a question. On the mobile side, VoiceOver got to market first and best, and they still have a significant user advantage over TalkBack, 70.6 to 34.7%. To point about what screen readers do, what things, Lucy, are, we do try to cover a fair amount of that in these tutorials. So if you're asked to add a screen reader into your testing toolkit, highly recommend that you use these resources as well. With enterprise tools, they can be very, very helpful. Enterprise tools, there are a bunch of them out there that will scan an entire web presence and give you automated results. What I should have said about Wave, and I will say now because it's very similar, automated tools aren't going to get to 100%. They can't expose all the accessibility bugs. I'll make up percentages because I think that's what we do, between 30 and 60%. I mean, I don't know, you all probably track data on what, but it's really hard to say. How much an automated tool can find in a site depends on how the thing is built, right? Depends on how complex it is, how many things are custom versus stock HTML. So there's quite a range of percentage, but at the enterprise scale, it's nice to have that enterprise view sometimes and to look at trends over time. You can repeat the same tests multiple times over time, and you can dig down and see, okay, this department is struggling with these 3 things. Let's reinforce this with them somehow. You can use it to identify training needs. You can use data like this to identify that, well, our whole shop is struggling with these 5 things. We need to find more resources, or we need to get some training to build the skill set up in this as well. So it's not just, I don't think, about tracking progress over time. It's also using this data to help guide bigger picture pieces of the work. So you get stumped, you need to phone a friend, you need help. 2 resources that we use in addition to the WebAIM site ourselves: ARIA Authoring Practices Guide. If you are in a position where you're trying to consult with people or fix your own stuff, really, really helpful. They document really specific keyboard interactions that you would expect with something like an accordion pattern, for example. There's a lot of guidance about the different pieces of markup that need to exist on these different interactive elements, especially the more complex ones. There are some places where I think a bunch of us would admit we don't necessarily agree with the guidance in it. Not many, but there are a few, but for the most part, really, really helpful. Then if you're getting to the really technical piece, what is this thing? What is this attribute, this element? It used to be, I don't know if it's still Mozilla Developer Network, but MDN Web Docs, or if you just go into Google or Bing and you type in like role equal presentation, you're probably going to get one of their articles about that role. Really, really helpful when it comes to trying to figure out how to fix stuff. We route people to these different resources with some guidance pretty regularly. Any questions from anyone? Okay, so since we are all here, a couple of thoughts. I'm going a little bit off, not off script. It's my script. I shouldn't have said that. You would have thought this was my script the whole time. So I want to say thanks to AbleTech. It's like everyone's kind of winding down here at the end of the day, which is good. Like hopefully you're relaxing. No, thank you all so much for keeping this event going, bringing it back hybrid and keeping it hybrid this year. Between the 8 of us, I emailed all the speakers and I said, hey, how long have you been doing accessibility work professionally? And between all 8 of us, it adds up to over 150 years. So AbleTech is very, very good at pulling these folks in. I know I drove this morning the 20 minutes, but people took planes and such, at pulling these people in. And when I was involved in running the event, one of the things that excited me the most about it was we could do that. We could pull some people from the accessibility space here to this accessibility community, right? We do have a good accessibility community here in Oklahoma. You all are evidence of it. I'm sure there are a bunch of folks in state who are on Zoom as well. This is a tremendous opportunity to connect yourself to that local community, as well as to those of us who are in some of the broader accessibility conversations. Take advantage of it. And I will encourage it. And I'm not going to beg because I don't want to put people in an uncomfortable social situation, but we need each other. This work has always been hard, right? We have always had some headwinds. The headwinds are a hell of a lot stronger now than they have been in the 15 years I've been doing this work. We're going to need one another, whether we need to prop someone up or we need to lean on someone. So I highly encourage you and invite you to connect with this community here, the community on Zoom, in the chat. Again, you can connect with me. I'm Rob Carr, A11Y on LinkedIn. It's fantastic that we are all here as a community, and let's take advantage. And that doesn't mean you have to be super gregarious and go around to different tables at lunch. Just whatever way you're comfortable connecting, I highly encourage you to do so. This is one of the best professional communities out there. I can pretty much guarantee it. And then I want to say a couple of thanks in addition. Thanks to each and every one of you for doing the work. You're here today, you're on Zoom, you're dedicating time to it, whether it's a huge part of your job or a tiny part of your job. And in many cases, in most, it is not formally a part of your job. Really thank you for doing the work. Because like I said, the headwinds are stronger now than I've ever seen. With that, the usual thanks. Well, I'll stop and see first. Questions, comments, concerns? Everyone's like, I thought he was going to shut up. All right. Well, very truly and sincerely, thanks to each and every one of you all. Thank you to AbleTech. Thanks for listening to me ramble on for close to an hour, and do take advantage of this opportunity that we have over the next couple of days. So hope everybody can make it back tomorrow. I believe we have closing remarks.